Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network, where me and Dallas King make our way through the A24 filmography and now TV shows, and along the way we welcome those involved in front of and behind the camera to talk with us. In this episode, I'm joined by Slice's writer-director Austin Vesely, who takes us behind the scenes of shooting his first feature film. Austin discusses creating music videos and short films, his working relationship with Chance the Rapper, the star of Slice, the journey of developing Slice over 5 years, his experience on set with a fantastic cast, developing the film in post-production, and much, much more. For those not familiar, Slice is set in a spooky small town where a slew of pizza delivery boys are slain on the job. Two daring survivors set out to catch the culprits behind the cryptic crime spree. Thanks to Austin for joining me, and I hope you too will enjoy this episode. I always love to know how people like yourself got involved in sort of the creative industry. Was it always your goal in mind to get there?
Yeah, it was. I all my life I was kind of interested in creative stuff, whether it was filmmaking or music. And there was a time like in high school where I was pretty sure that like music was going to be my life. I was a drummer, and I guess still am, but I don't really do it a whole lot because I live in an apartment. But so then in high school I kind of started taking film a little bit more seriously, and I liked the way that it kind of combined so many different art forms like photography and even music and writing and stuff like that. So I started to take it more seriously about that time, probably when I was 17 or 18. So yeah, it's always been kind of like part of my my trajectory. I felt like I always wanted to do something creative, even when I was sort of trying to I guess approach it in a more practical way. I was looking at journalism because I thought that was sort of a way that I could apply creative writing or something like that to a quote unquote real job, which of course that was 12 years ago, and journalism has changed a lot since then. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it.
What were sort of the films and kind of creative talents that were sort of that inspired you?
I remember I was really into Wes Anderson. I think was the first time that I saw a filmmaker, because his stuff was just so distinct in the way it stood out. I remember seeing his stuff when I was like maybe 12 years old, like when Royal Tenenbaums came out, and I just didn't really get it because it was so different than anything I'd seen. And then kind of when I got a little bit older, when I was more of a teenager, I was like, oh, okay, I get the humor in this now, and something that stylized I thought was just really amazing. And then I think shortly after that, I got into Paul Thomas Anderson, and yeah, like I remember going to see There'll Be Blood in theaters, and I was like, oh my God, that was such a huge experience for me. Yeah, I think those were probably the first two guys that really inspired me.
I feel like I've wasted myself. Like I went to see Royal Tenenbaums around the same age. When There Will Be Blood was my first Paul Thomas Anderson film at the cinema. Here I am. You've gone on to be the filmmaker, and here I am, just like maybe I missed the opportunity as well.
No, you gotta. You know what? I think this is great too. Getting to talk to people about the creative industry. I think it's great.
You kind of worked on a range of shorts and music videos before Slice. For people that are maybe sort of tuning into this that have only seen Slice, what would you kind of recommend people check out from sort of your back catalogue?
I think the thing pre-Slice that I was most proud of was probably the Sunday Candy music video for Chance the Rapper, and that kind of speaks to how my actual career really got started, which was making music videos, particularly for Chicago rap artists, and particularly Chance. Starting in like 2000, I think 11. So yeah, there's like a whole slew of early Chance videos that we were making on $0 budgets and basements and stuff like that. And then kind of just as his career sort of progressed, it kind of opened up some more opportunities for me too to make some bigger videos and things like that. So that's kind of like what my career trajectory looked like before Slice.
What kind of experiences did you sort of gain from working on shorts and music videos before sort of going into feature films?
Like I said, it was a lot of like $0 budget stuff, and I think that sort of do-it-yourself mentality. Because around the time I started getting into actually making stuff, like Canon DSLRs were all the rage. I had the T2i, and a lot of people had the 7D or the 5D, and you could make these images that looked really great for very little money. That was like a prosumer camera basically, and so I think having to just like you know, figure out what's available to you at your cost, which was often nothing, and finding people that you like to work with and things like that. I think that those were the things that were really important about moving through that space. But also, I think music videos are really fun because you get to try a lot of stuff. They're really, depending on how you look at them, they can be, just like experimental short films unto themselves. And you get to sort of take risks and figure out what works for you. And I don't want to say that the stakes are lower, but it's like, it's not a feature film, when you're kind of taking these risks. So I think those were probably the most important things that I was able to glean from that.
Slice came out in 2018. How long was the journey to making that film?
Yeah, it was quite a long time. I think the first draft of the feature version I wrote in early 2014, but I'd written a short film version of that even earlier. I think maybe even 2012. So it was kind of an idea that I was playing with for a long time. And then once the feature was written, I think it was the summer of 2014 that I actually started working with my producer Brandon Riley and having a little bit of like seed money to get people interested. And we had the chance attachment because he was my friend, and we had already talked through that whole thing. So we kind of went to work on raising the money, which ended up being another. I think that was almost 2 years. Yeah, it was 2 years between like that, starting that and production. So all in all, I think it was about 5 years or so, or maybe 4 years of like actual work straight through.
How did the sort of film evolve through that time? Was it always going to be a feature? And was what we kind of ultimately saw in the film, was that sort of your vision from kind of start to finish, or did that sort of change, twist, evolve over time, over those kind of 5 years?
Yeah, it did change a little bit. I think initially when I wrote the short, there was no supernatural element to it, which I think people might find kind of surprising because that's like a lot of the core of what the feature is. The short was basically a short about Astrid investigating the Sean murder, and it stayed really contained within like the pizza place. And at some point, maybe maybe a year after I wrote the short, I actually started trying to write it like as a pilot, and that's when the world expanded a lot. And I can't even remember what made me want to introduce. Oh, I think the werewolf idea came first, actually. So that was the first thing that came into like expanding it into supernatural stuff, and then the ghost came from that, and then the whole world of like Kingfisher kind of started unfolding from there. And I was thinking a lot about like the show Twin Peaks, and actually a lot of prestige television actually was what I was thinking about when I was writing it. Even down to like The Wire, which I don't think people would be like, oh, that movie reminds me of The Wire. But it's kind of seeing how investigations play out and things like that. So um, that was kind of the big evolution, was changing it from like this contained story about Astrid and the murder of this estranged lover to becoming this sort of like weird like socio-political supernatural film noir kind of thing.
Was it a challenge to kind of bring all those elements together? You've got horror, comedy, drama, thriller, all this kind of coming together. Was that a difficult one to balance?
I think it was, but I don't remember thinking of it that way. Just because it was kind of like, this is what I'm doing, and so those are just the choices that I'm making. So I wasn't thinking of it like, oh, how am I going to balance this? It was just like, if it felt like it was working, then it was good, and if it didn't, I would change it. But I think it wasn't like I was looking at it so much like, oh, I'm writing a a horror comedy exactly. It was sort of just like letting the characters and the world speak to me, and then applying my voice to that, and that's sort of how it came to be what it was. Yeah, I wasn't thinking too much about the big swing of balancing all those things. And I think if I did think about it too much, it probably would have been way more intimidating.
At what stage does someone like A24 get involved, and what's their pitch to you and how they can support your vision?
Yeah, it was so that's how that worked was kind of interesting. So we had the chance attachment and we had raised some money to make the movie, and then we had about half of what we wanted for our budget. So we figured, well, let's announce the film with a cool poster and the chance involvement, and see if we can't raise the rest of our budget. So that's what we did, and we posted this cool art poster made by this guy Alex Yacarino, and Chance posted it to his socials. And just because of like the platform that he had at that time and the sort of prestige around him, it ended up that like the next day or 2 days later, there was a New York Times article that was like Chance the Rapper to star in werewolf movie or something like that. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And that sort of opened up, the concept of this movie to Hollywood and different places. And um, so A24 reached out to me about it, and they were like, hey, we'd love to see that movie and, see if we could get involved. And most people thought that we'd already shot it, and that's why the press was out there. So it was kind of like, oh, surprise, there is no movie. But sure, let's have the discussion. Of course, there was a script and everything, but yeah, so they checked out the script and were excited about the prospect of working with Chance, and it kind of progressed from there. Yeah.
You've mentioned sort of working before with Chance the Rapper. Was he always your first pick for the role?
Oh yeah, definitely. I wrote the role for him, and I think in some ways it was kind of like thinking about the Thriller music video and stuff like that, which was a huge influence for me as a kid, and sort of like writing this werewolf role, and then thinking about that as Chance, like really just trying to write like what is it like to create this crazy world, and then place Chance more or less as himself in the movie, but he's also a werewolf. Um, so it was fun to do. I was trying to sort of write something in his voice that he'd be comfortable playing, and that people would be excited to see him being, like the charismatic dude that he is.
You've assembled an incredible cast. How did you achieve that, and what was sort of your casting process like?
I appreciate that, and I really love this cast, and it was a lot of people were involved in that. We did a lot of local casting in Chicago through PR casting, Pascal Rudnicki casting, and AJ Lynx was my casting director here, and that was amazing because there was just to see how much incredible talent was out there in Chicago. And I liked that I was making this sort of like Illinois movie, and having some like regional players in it, I think would give it that authenticity. And then we also had casting agents that we were working through A24, Rebecca Dealey and Jessica Kelly, and they sort of helped me find, Zussi Beats and Paul Shear and folks like Chris Parnell, and stuff like Milan Knoll. So it was kind of a combination of forces.
You've got a diverse range of sort of comic talent involved. Do they get much of a chance to sort of influence the dialogue or the characters, or for you as the script king?
Yeah, I think primarily Paul Shear he was so great to work with because he was willing to do exactly what was on the page, but he was always also there to like elevate the moment. And it was never in a way that was overstepping or anything, but he's a great improvisational comedian. And he would put a button on a scene, in a way that I hadn't thought of. He would just change the approach to a piece of dialogue, because just this being a first movie, you write a character and you might have somebody in mind for it. For me, it was not Paul Shear. That was a great surprise to me that he would be interested in being in this movie. But you write with this certain voice in your head, but you're always adapting to whoever actually embodies that person. So it was really exciting for me to kind of see how that would play out. And then Chris Parnell, he had a few really great improvisational moments too, where like one of my favorite visual gags in the script was like him throwing the suit jacket over the painting that he's doing, and it still exposes the breasts in there. It's just something that happened on the day, and so there's always fun things like that. But Chris was also really great, to me as a first time director, where I'm very intimidated by Chris Parnell. I've been watching him on TV since I was a kid, and he just sat me down on the first day and was like, please, direct me. He was excited to be there. So yeah.
You touched on that first day. What was it like for you that first day kind of comes, as say 5 years you've been working on this film, short films, music videos. You now get the opportunity to be a feature film director. Was there nerves, excitement, and how did that feeling kind of evolve sort of through the shooting process?
Yeah, it was definitely nerve-wracking, and like you're kind of just like jumping in, like here we go. And I think the main thing that I really remember about that first day was just like not knowing if anything was right, which is tough because we were also shooting like a lot of third act important scenes on the first day. It was just a matter of scheduling that's the way it was. But just having, I'd never done something of this scope and scale, and shooting the pieces like this, and so just being in the room watching the takes and being like, knowing what a good performance looks like, but actually not knowing if you have a scene. And it wasn't really probably until the first dailies came in, like the first rush edits, maybe day 2 or day 3, that I was like, okay, this stuff is working out. And that was obviously a very good feeling.
The film is really fantastic. This sort of world building, this kind of fantasy world of ghost and supernatural elements. Is that something that's kind of always appealed to you, not just sort of telling a story, but developing a wider world where you could imagine sort of an encyclopedia about this kind of world that Slice lives in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great because I think something to me, how do I put it? It's like knowing the geography of a place kind of means a lot to me in imagining it. So if that makes any sense, it's like in terms of Kingfisher, it was like a lot of it was based on the place I went to high school, which was the Quad Cities in Iowa. And so when I was thinking of things like the strip mall or different things like that, I kind of had this real geography in my head, and then as a starting point. And then from there, I could kind of build out Kingfisher. And then when we went to Joliet, which is where we shot it, and actually looked at the places, it was like, oh, wow, okay, I can see this place, and it feels like it has a texture. And I think in creating any movie or any story that I do, I really kind of rely on something tangible like that to kind of place myself in it. And the best way to do that, and it takes a lot of time, is to sort of just really develop that, from scratch, and create something, even if it takes place in a world that is, just more adjacent to ours than Slice, because, something not supernatural. I think that, developing the culture of the style of what that world is still fun to me. Like if you're writing something that's in 1960s LA or something like that, just finding the exact sort of vibe of what these the characters in this particular story, what their world is like.
What surprised you when you were shooting kind of your first feature? Was there anything that kind of came out of left field, and how did you sort of overall find the experience?
Man, it's so hard to think back on as you get further away from it, the challenges start to kind of blur out, and you really just remember it as a really great experience. I think there were challenges that would be surprising, like Paul Scheer had a death in the family during his last week of shooting, and he had to get out of there. And so, figuring out ways to like, okay, now how are we going to adjust, all of Paul's work into one day now, and still have it serve the film. And I think figuring out those challenges and finding that with the right team around you and the right attitude about it, I think that, you can really you can tackle those things. And I think that learning that and learning about the camaraderie of a set and things like that, I think were the most exciting things to me about the experience.
How long did you sort of spend all together kind of shooting the film?
It was 5 weeks, I believe. So I think it was 24 shooting days, something like that, 24 or 25.
The film obviously involves quite a lot of kind of special effects elements. How is that sort of? I always imagine it's a difficult one, perhaps to visualize, maybe for myself, like on set, how something might look kind of once those effects are on. Was that something that kind of came quite naturally for you, or was it one of those ones you have a lot of faith, perhaps in post and the special effects teams to visualize that?
Yeah, it didn't come totally easy, and I didn't have like a VFX supervisor during production. So it was that was something that I'll never do again. you know, I'll have somebody there who knows what you're going to need in the can for the post people to do their work most effectively. But so basically what I did, I mean, for example, like the fight scene at the finale, we had to, break that up over 2 days. Again, sort of a scheduling thing. And so basically I sat in the parking lot of that strip mall there and drew an overhead of what it was, and then just sort of mapped out the fight with little overheads of stick figures and figured out, how can we have the fewest shots of the burning pizza place in the background, because every time we see that, that's going to cost me money, or something like that. So yeah, it was kind of winging it, and I'm really grateful to Phosphine and all the people in post who did do such great work, because again, I didn't have somebody there to be like, here's what those folks are gonna want from you.
What was the edit process like to bring together all these elements for the film? And did the film sort of evolve in the kind of edit, or did it very much kind of come together as you kind of expected it to, as you kind of visualized it over those 5 years?
Yeah, it did. I mean, it definitely felt like the movie that I wanted to make, which was a good feeling. And I mean, I think it went through 3 different cuts, which was basically I did one just on my own because I couldn't stop myself once I got home from shooting. I basically just cut one, and that cut was like an hour and 50 minutes, like the director's cut, right? And it's very obvious that that's too much stuff. I've left everything in. So then we kind of narrowed it down with another editor, Ariel Sherman, in New York City, and then once again with Jacob Craycroft in New York City. And basically a lot of what that was kind of figuring out what is the difference between that, that hour and 50-minute cut and now the hour and, I think the movie's an hour and 23 or 24 or something like that now. And just figuring out what stuff was redundant, and a lot of that, I think what I learned the most in the edit was like I should have beat up my script a little bit better, and cut out some of those redundancies and stuff like that, prior to shooting.
Was there any tough cuts where you're like, it's something that you knew maybe had to go, but it was almost that kill your baby sort of thing that was a real struggle to remove?
A lot of it was just like nice looking stuff, like when it got down to it, like I was always on board, with like an editor's perspective, especially, people who are more seasoned than I. And so it was never, I can't remember anything where I was like, oh, that's going to break my heart. But sometimes it was like a setup that you remember doing where you're like, oh man, this looks so cool, and we're just going to lose the whole sequence. But that's totally fine, because that's really not what it's about. That's music video logic almost. It's like, oh, we got to keep this cool thing in, but it's a narrative piece. So you've got to just make sure that you're telling the most effective story.
It's one of those things. When I was revisiting sort of the film over the weekend, one thing stood out to me that it completely passed me by until recently was that you had Ludwig Gornassassen. Hopefully I'm probably
Goranson.
Yeah, I butchered that name. Nothing new there. He's also become one of Hollywood's biggest composers, and obviously he's worked on your film as well. What was that relationship between the two of you, and what makes him such a special talent?
He's just, yeah, he's a different kind of guy. I mean, he's very dedicated to whatever particular thing he's working on at that moment, and just figuring out how to do it a little bit differently. Like, um, so I had met him again through sort of the Chance camp. He had done some of the production on Chance's Acid Rap project in 2013. So that's kind of how we connected. And so the composers were actually Ludwig Göransson and Nathan Matthew David, who they worked together quite a bit. And so, you know, it was kind of like showing him temp tracks of stuff that I wanted, and it was a lot of like John Carpenter and whatnot. And he's like, "Cool, I get what you're going for. Let's figure out how to update that." And yeah, to speak to his creativity, I remember just like looking at what he did for the Creed movies and stuff, where he went to a boxing gym and recorded impacts, you know, of boxing gloves hitting bags and stuff like that, and then created, you know, music out of that, you know, sort of created rhythms. And then at the time he was doing Slice with Nathan, he also had in the other room Black Panther. And so he was like, there were these like unfinished VFX shots of Black Panther that he was scoring, and he was telling me all about his like travels through Africa to learn about tribal instruments and things like that. And it's just really fascinating, you know, just to see a guy who's like, yeah, I just went and traveled for a year to get ready for this, you know, because he wanted to respect the cultures and everything else so much. So I think it's just that dedication combined with the fact that he's just an incredible musician.
You touched on it earlier, the kind of the early marketing campaign, and then the campaign sort of after the film came out really caught a lot of people's attention. I seem to remember everyone kind of buzzing about on Twitter, what is Slice? How can we see Slice? How important is it to have sort of a good teaser and trailer campaign for an indie movie like Slice that is going to be up against so much kind of obstacles to get people's attention?
Yeah, I mean, for any you know, sort of like independent film, and again, I mean, I had a huge leg up just being, you know, on A24's roster. I think that, you know, I can never you know, undersell that, so that helps a lot. But I think for any independent film, it's, you know, to have some sort of interesting marketing thing that will grab people uh, is hugely important. And you know, we got to do a couple of like fun little things with the takeoffs of the Pizza Hut logo and the Domino's one, the Little Caesars. Like I have a cease and desist from Little Caesars, which is so exciting to me personally for that poster. And so, you know, that aside, it's fun to get into that, you know, especially after, again, you've worked on this thing mostly under wraps for so long. When it comes down to like, okay, what's the fun way we're going to introduce this to the world? It's really, really important and exciting.
Did that buzz surprise you, come with pressure, or come with excitement when it all started to build up? I mean, even before, as you're saying, even before the film comes out, people are talking about a film that hasn't even really shot yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, one thing is with any trailer, it's like you have, you know, what, a minute. I think our trailer's a minute and 20 seconds or something like that. It's like you have this amount of time to introduce people to something that's actually a much bigger premise or a bigger concept, and you don't want to feel like you're fooling anybody, or like they're gonna, because you know, you don't want them to walk into the theater or turn on their streaming service or whatever thinking that they're getting something and they're getting something else. And that may have happened for some people. It happens with probably any movie. But you know, you want to try and get something that gives them the spirit of what it is. So there is a pressure to that, where it's like, oh, you know, you're kind of like getting inside your own head, like, oh, well, maybe they just love the trailer, you know, like maybe this isn't. But that's you know, that's just regular anxiety, I think, of putting anything into the world.
When sort of was your first experience showcasing it to an audience, and what was that moment like for you to share it with them?
I think, like, let's see, I did a really small like friend screening of a cut in early 2017, I think it was actually, and and that was really fun. And but it was also like personal, and nobody's really going to give you like hard criticism there. So the next time was an A24 like internal screening, and they invited some people along, and that was cool because then I didn't know any of those people, and they were filling out anonymous forms and stuff like that, and that was great because what I got sort of, the reviews sort of ran the gamut, and you could figure out like what things are going to be polarizing about either the comedy or the tone or whatever it is, and then what elements of that you should, or what criticisms of that you should ignore, because by and large people get it, or who are supposed to get it is going to get it. And I remember actually one of those screenings, Yorma Taccone from The Lonely Island was there, and I didn't even realize it. It was the end of the movie, and there's like this guy in the front row raising his hand to give feedback, and he gave me notes that I put in the movie, and I thought that was just like really exciting personally because I was such a fan of those guys' stuff too.
Kind of more and more people are discovering your film through sort of word of mouth. I think a lot of people recently have done like 31 days of sort of Halloween and have picked that film up as well. Obviously the A24 brand being attached to it brings in different audiences as well. What's it been like to sort of see the film kind of grow over the past few years and more people finding it?
Yeah, it's really exciting because I think especially in today's world, I mean, like unless you're like the Avengers Endgame, it's like most movies cycle is like pretty short, and so to be an independent film that had a one night only wide release, it was like, or I guess maybe you'd say limited, but it was national. I think that it feels like you work for 4 years, and then it's like, okay, it came out, and then 2 weeks later it goes on Amazon Prime, and then it's kind of like that's the cycle, and now it's just going to go and live. So the exciting thing is every time somebody new is like, oh man, I checked out this film and connected with it, like that's always just so rewarding, and I just hope that continues to happen, and it's very exciting.
As a sort of independent kind of filmmaker yourself, obviously things just now are incredibly tough for sort of the industry and cinemas, but there's been a lot of talk this year, and I think Jim Cummings, who did Thunder Road, had a really good article recently, or a post, where it was talking about how independent films are sort of being able to thrive more this year without sort of the big blockbusters kind of dominating the conversations. More people are engaging with films sort of similar to kind of Slice. Is that something for yourself that gives you a bit of hope for the future, that people are maybe going to start to maybe give more time to sort of smaller independent films, that people are going to access them more potentially as much as they would sort of, or bigger films? Or is that sort of just, this is the moment we're in just now?
Yeah, I think that it's, I think to the extent that maybe more people are watching stuff because they're at home, and the theaters are down, and the studios are pulling their releases. I think that it does give you some air, but at the same time, it's like it's really difficult to make a movie right now. So it's great that again this movie lives on this platform and people can find it, and I think that that's true. Like pandemic aside, I think that the streaming services and stuff like that, I think that it does give, maybe you'd call it a second life or something like that to a lot of different projects, even what is it? Schitt's Creek just won all those, it's a TV show, but it just won all those awards, and it seems like that it didn't really have a base for like a couple of seasons or something like that, and then it goes online and picks up. And maybe I'm wrong about Schitt's Creek, but I know that there's plenty of examples of stuff like that, and I think that's great. So it's kind of, that's the upside, and then there's sort of the downside of there's just so much stuff that how do you you're kind of overwhelmed, and how do you pick, and sometimes that will just lead you to go to the best advertised thing. So I think there's ups and downs to it, but I think absolutely, just like anybody coming across Slice on Showtime this week or something like that, I think is just really thrilling.
Is there kind of I've been debating this myself recently, is like there's that potential hope for the future in a way that once this pandemic passes, that there's obviously been so much discussion about things like James Bond, your Fast and the Furious, your Marvel movies, which are $300 million movies, and that they need to sort of a long run at the cinema with big audiences to make their money back. And that there's been the argument that in the future, after this wave of films have come and gone, that there'll be the investments in films of $1 million and less, whether it's something like the next Slice, the next Moonlight, for example, that people will invest in that because there's a better chance of return, and that Hollywood might sort of realign itself potentially. Is that maybe naive of me, or is that something that you sort of as an industry person could see maybe happening as well?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting outlook. I think I've kind of felt so suspended in time the past few months that it's hard to even think ahead. But I think that I hope so. You know, I guess is basically the main thing I could say is just I hope that there's always going to be room, and if there's more room for smaller movies, that's amazing. You know.
How have things been for yourself as sort of a creative talent? You know, we've had quite a few people on sort of during the lockdown period that things are in limbo. They're just working on scripts. They have extra time to work on the post-production of films. What's been your sort of lockdown experience?
Yeah, it's been kind of the same deal. It's you know, I mean, it's pretty bleak, but at the same time, people are still developing things. Like you said, whether it's developing a script or actually, you know, developing it, packaging it as a movie. So, you know, I've had time to be able to work on something that I'd finished pre-pandemic to have it ready, you know, for whenever it's safe. So I'm excited about that possibility, you know. But other than that, it's just kind of treading water and trying to support your friends and stuff like that.
What can maybe people look out for in the future? Is there anything that you can sort of tease at this moment in time?
I wouldn't tease it so much like down to a concept or anything like that, but it's definitely my next feature that I'm hoping to get made. I think is a departure from Slice, and it's a much smaller film, and I think a lot more personal, more obviously personal, at least than Slice. You know, Slice is very much me, but it's also there's so many bells and whistles that you could, you know, maybe not see that if you're looking at it from the outside. Whereas I'm, you know, trying to do something just a little bit more focused on the next round.
We pose this question to everyone that we get on, but what are some of the sort of the highlights of the A24 filmography for you?
The first one that comes to mind is Green Room, just because it's been on my mind through the Halloween season. I love that movie. It always strikes me, and maybe it's just because it's like a contemporary movie where, you know, like neo-Nazis are the villains, and it came out in 2015. Like, it's just the timing of it or something. But I think about that one a lot. Let's see. I love American Honey. Gosh, there's so many. I mean, I'm just a huge A24 fan. Like, it's dream of a lifetime that I was able to work with them on Slice, and they were so good to me too. You know, I think the last one I caught before the pandemic was The Lighthouse in the theater. And it was actually just me and my best friend in the theater, and nobody else, and so it was like kind of a perfect setting for that movie.
Probably it's the film that seems to kind of perfectly encapsulate the year so far as well.
Absolutely.
If anyone was wanting to kind of keep up to date with sort of any news, development, kind of content from you, where's the best kind of places to check out your work or follow you online now, Austin?
I'm on Twitter, just Austin Vesely, and I'm also on Instagram. My Twitter is mostly like political retweets and stuff like that, and hopefully it won't be so urgent to have to do all that all the time soon, but who knows.
If it was all wrong, we will just cut that out tomorrow and we will just pretend that never happened.
Oh yeah, good call. And then yeah, Instagram is probably where I post the most stuff related to my work.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you on, Austin, and yeah, it's been a real good time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. I really appreciate it, man, and I really enjoy what you're doing, and thanks for the conversation. I had a great time.